Hello, welcome to ACT English. My name is Juyeon. Some of you may be familiar with the ACT format, but for many of you, this might be your first time getting acquainted with the ACT. So before we begin the lecture, I want to give you a brief rundown of what the ACT is like. First, what's tested on the ACT English section? On the ACT, you'll have 75 questions in 45 minutes. That means you have 36 seconds for each question. As far as the format goes, you'll get 5 passages, which are about 330 to 350 words each. The topic of these passages will vary. Look at the sample. Here, you'll see the passage at the left side of the column and then the questions on the right. The underlined portions indicate the questions. You get 4 answer choices, and you have to look out for questions that ask least, except, and not. This means you'll have 4 answer choices, and 3 of them will be acceptable answers, but 1 will be the wrong answers. And that is what you're looking for in least, except, and not type of questions. Here are some general tips on how to study. Skills vary depending on where you are right now. So if you're scoring 28 and higher, then you know the concepts and the drills. So keep meticulous notes of which questions you missed and fortify those areas by repeating as many actual tests as possible. If you're scoring within 24 to 28 range, you're almost there. You may need to go back and review these contents by relying on textbooks or lectures. Try a hybrid of taking a lecture for one day and then doing a prep test on the next day. If you're within the 18 and 24 range, this is a good place to start. The most common scenario might be that you're relying on your intuition for most of the questions rather than actually knowing the specific topics that are tested. So try to go through a lecture to gain a comprehensive knowledge about the tested areas. If you're scoring 17 and below, it's okay. It is definitely a good idea to go through a lecture series. Then go through the drilling process. Once you feel like you've mastered the topics, then try another prep test. Now, here are some tips on time management. I know that time management is often stressful for students, so here are some strategies to go about it. First of all, spend less time on the usage and mechanics questions. As long as you know the rules, you can probably tackle these questions in about 15 seconds. This gives you more time to think about rhetorical skills questions. For these questions, you have to take about 40 to 45 seconds. If you're running out of time at the end and you know you can't get through all of them, prioritize the micro-level questions. These questions include usage, mechanics, style, and alternative words questions. Also, don't mull over the questions too much. If you're looking at a question for more than 20 seconds and you still have no clue, then skip that question. Always think about what the right answer might look like before plunging into the answer choices. If you start considering all the possible answer choices, then you're carving away from your precious time. Make a system to easily see the passage and the question column. This will save time so that you don't have to look back and forth to see the passage and the question. Also, don't think too deeply about the passage. Remember, this is not ACT reading. So you don't have to think about the hidden meanings or the implied messages of the passage. So focus on the specific questions and skills that you're required to learn for this specific section. Get familiar with the question strings. If you start reading all the questions very thoroughly, then that also takes away from your time. So be able to predict the questions by getting yourself familiarized with them. So, students often ask me, should I always time myself or should I sometimes time myself? My answer is always time yourself. Even in the beginning, try to get into the habit of setting enough time so that you can know how much time you have to think through a question. Here are some tips to look for when you are doubting between several answer choices or you have two competing answer choices that are lurking out at you. The first tip is, the shorter, the better. Often, the best answer will be the shortest and most concise version of the answer choice. The second advice I can give you is when you encounter a punctuation question and you are forced to make a guess, then I would guess for using a comma instead of a semicolon or a colon, because a comma is the most often used punctuation. Lastly, use the voice in your head if you have two competing choices. So, silently read it to yourself as if you're talking to yourself. And then try to choose the answer that's most natural to you. Now let's look at the process of studying. The first phase is to immerse yourself in the study materials. This means beginning with the basics and learning the concepts and topics that are tested on the ACT. Then you drill yourself. This means you have to go through the concepts and then go through the questions directly related to those concepts and topics. That's what this ACT lecture will train you to do. Then you have to practice on your own. Practice means taking timed practice actual tests. So you will be sitting down at your desk with an actual prep test and you'll time yourself with the very similar setting of the ACT test. Afterwards, you have to analyze your test. In order to see your performance most clearly, I suggest that you not only look at the correct answers, but thoroughly see which points you are weak in, and then go review those points. So if I were to allot some time for my practice, I would give myself 45 minutes because that's the time you're given for the actual ACT English test. And then I would allot myself 1 hour and 30 minutes or more for analyzing my performance. So double the time of my practice will be necessary to really thoroughly review my performance on the practice test. So remember, it's very important to analyze your performance of the test after you actually do the practice tests. Let's talk about this lecture. Here's how to make the most out of this lecture. There are two phases. First, we learn the punctuation and grammar rules. This includes comma, semicolon, colon, dash, quotation, run-on sentences, and sentence fragments. In the grammar section, we'll learn number agreement, pronouns, verb tense, parallelism, comparison and description, modifying words or phrases, idioms, and word choice. Because we're learning the concepts in each rule, the first portion looks less like the actual ACT and more like an English class. However, we will then move on to the rhetorical skills section, which looks a lot like the actual ACT test. There, we will focus on rhetorical skills, but at the same time, we will be reviewing the grammar and punctuation topics as we go. The good thing about this lecture is that we want to give you a thorough overview. It's organized by rules so that you can remember them effectively. Also, you can set your own pace. So if something is confusing or you forgot a certain topic, then pause, go back, and review. However, you cannot just rely on this lecture. Before you take the ACT test, you need to make sure that you practice with the actual test questions provided by the ACT. And of course, you have to time yourself in exactly the way you would be timed in the ACT test. This will give you the conditions most similar to the actual test. Now, let's get into the immersion process. Stay focused with me as we start learning the rules.